Hello, my friend. I have prepared for you the most interesting historical photos that you have not seen yet. In 1958, the United States tested a full-body armored suit that weighed about 30 kilograms and used two front lights for work at night or indoors. It could stop close-range pellet impacts and even had two hand ports for aiming. Vietnam, 1967. A United States Marine escorts a Viet Cong suspect through tall grass while an M48 Patton armored vehicle waits behind them. This photo captures how patrols worked, where one rope and one armored giant could decide the next move. At an airport in Algeria, 3 travelers were stopped after trying to fly to Dubai while wearing full head coverings and face masks to look like Arab women. The before and after photo shows how identity checks, documents, and face matching can expose a disguise in seconds. Western Germany, October 25, 1943. Captain Heinz Schweitzer uses only a hammer and a chisel to work on a failed airdropped metal cylinder. One wrong tap could be the last. Italian Eritrea, August 27, 1935. Eritrean schoolboys raise their arms during a public pledge to join the Balila, Italy's colonial youth program. The scene shows how a colony tried to rewrite identity early. Nantes, 1985. Georges Courtois turned his own courtroom moment into a live media demand, insisting television cover everything. The tense scene ended with everyone leaving safely. Los Angeles, 1947. 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, later nicknamed the Black Dahlia, became a headline case that still has no confirmed answer. Decades of leads and many false confessions never solved it. On the Eastern Front, German troops appear as dark silhouettes while a wooden house burns, turning the night into a harsh spotlight. One frame shows how a single fire could reveal positions, erase cover, and change decisions in seconds. December 7, 1941. A person watches from Ford Island as the United States battleship California lists hard in the water, with smoke rising after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That single morning pushed the United States into World War II. In 1984, Czech-Canadian stuntman Karel Suchek built a shock-absorbing barrel and rode it over Niagara Falls, one of the wildest survival stunts ever filmed. Christmas Eve, 1945 in West Virginia. 5 Sodder children vanished after their house fire, yet no clear remains were ever found in the rubble. Broken rescue gear, reported sightings, and a later mystery photo turned the case into one of America's strangest missing child puzzles. Germany, 1922. The quiet Hinterkaifeck farm became the center of an unsolved case after all 6 residents were found dead, with clues hinting someone had been inside before it happened. Footprints that seemed to come in but not leave, strange attic sounds and signs the intruder stayed afterward. September 1944 in the Netherlands. United States 101st Airborne paratroopers inspect a shattered cargo glider after a rough landing during Operation Market Garden. These silent wooden aircraft delivered men, jeeps, and radios fast. November 14, 1965 at Landing Zone X-ray in Vietnam's Central Highlands, Captain Ed Freeman flew a Huey into intense fire to lift out soldiers after medical flights stopped. He kept returning again and again and later received the Medal of Honor. Washington, 1929. A White House security dog leans through the iron fence to take a treat from a visitor on the sidewalk. Decades later, modern Secret Service teams often choose Belgian Malinois because they learn fast. 1939. Chinese Americans march at a United States dock, warning that exported scrap iron to Japan could come back as weapons. Their signs show an early fight over supply chains, where metal on a ship could decide what happens across an ocean. Vietnam, 1976. A child stands in a mangrove swamp turned into a field of dead stumps and mud. Years after defoliant spraying, these coastal tree walls could not protect shorelines or fish nurseries, so whole villages felt the damage in food and storms. Seoul, 1979. Kim Jae-gyu, head of South Korea's intelligence agency, reenacts at a dinner table how President Park Chung-hee was killed during the investigation. The photo freezes a stunning reversal of loyalty, and Kim was executed the next year. California, 1954. Farmers built a stilted crawler tractor with about 6.5 feet of ground clearance so it could straddle tall sweet corn without crushing it. It could dust and detassel even in muddy fields where normal rubber tires would sink. In 1939, inventor Williams made a driver signaling glove powered by a dry cell battery with tiny white and red bulbs on the fingertips so turns could be seen at night. It was an early attempt to solve road communication before bright indicators became common on cars. 1951. Robert Doisneau photographed a float workshop where giant papier-mâché heads and hands wait in crates like silent characters backstage. 1930. A Hooverville shantytown spreads across empty ground, built from scrap wood and metal during the Great Depression. These camps grew near rail yards and city edges because jobs and food lines were close, but the homes could vanish overnight. Belgium, 1940. A German soldier grins while riding a captured Belgian Vickers track tractor, a tiny machine built to haul loads across soft ground. Captured equipment like this was often reused on the spot because a working vehicle was more valuable than a perfect plan. Dresden March, 1946. Women known as the Trimmerfrauen pass bricks hand to hand, rebuilding walls from the city's ruins. They cleaned and sorted salvaged bricks so they could be used again, speeding up rebuilding when machines and materials were scarce. In 1921, Soviet engineer Valerian Abakovsky built the Aerowagon, a rail car powered by an aircraft engine and a giant propeller to move officials fast. During a high-speed test run, it derailed, killing Abakovsky and 6 passengers. In many United States cities, especially New York City, pinball was treated like a gambling menace and banned from 1942 until 1976. Officials even staged raids where machines were smashed in public. 1926. A hotel room sign orders guests not to snore and offers to move night noise lovers to floors 12 to 14 by asking the clerk. It is a funny glimpse of early hotel rules when thin walls and no air conditioning made every sound travel. 1939. Airline passengers sit at 20,000 feet, wearing oxygen masks because early planes were not pressurized for comfort. Those hoses and bottles were the only way to avoid low oxygen effects. In 1947, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl reached French Polynesia after crossing the Pacific from Peru on the Kon-Tiki, a raft built from balsa logs and hemp rope. The voyage was meant to test whether ancient-style rafts could handle open ocean routes. Born in 1865, Ella Williams became a world-famous stage performer under the name Madame Boma, promoted as the African Giantess in the late 1800s. Berlin then and now. The same view near the Brandenburg Gate shows the wall era with guards and graffiti, and today, a normal street full of cars and people. That contrast turns one spot into a time machine. July 17, 1955. The Disneyland parking lot on opening day is packed with shiny 1950s cars, like a moving car show before guests even entered. It hints how huge the debut was, because thousands arrived at once, and the road system had to learn what theme park traffic really means. In 1953, the United States ran Operation Upshot Knothole in Nevada, including Test Grable, where a giant cannon fired a special test shell about 7 miles before a bright sky burst. It is the only time the United States used an artillery gun for a full-scale test like this. India, around the 1920s. Dozens of washermen line a canal, beating and rinsing cloth on wooden frames in an open-air laundry street. This was a full supply chain in one place, where river water, muscle power. At a 1960s celebrity driveway, the gate bell came with a blunt warning sign telling strangers not to press unless invited. Reportedly posted at Frank Sinatra's Beaumont Drive entrance, it shows how privacy was enforced before cameras and smart locks. Yellowstone, 1950s. A bear stands at a car window begging for snacks while a visitor backs away with a camera. Photos like this helped spark new park rules because feeding wildlife teaches animals to chase cars for food and creates serious safety problems. Siberia, 1980s. The wedding car is a tracked vehicle rolling through deep snow with giant rings on the roof. In remote winters, tracks beat wheels, so even a celebration could ride on the same machines that could cross frozen roads and drifts. November 1938. Jewish men arrested after Kristallnacht are shown arriving at Buchenwald, one of Germany's early large detention camps. This mass roundup held tens of thousands to terrorize communities and pressure families into forced emigration. Romania, 1947. King Michael drives his jeep straight down a grand stone staircase, turning a palace entrance into a test track. That same year, he was forced to abdicate, making this playful moment feel like the last snapshot before a country changed forever. This Commonwealth of Virginia driver's license from 1939 is basically a pocket-sized biography, listing address, signature, height, weight, hair color, eye color, and even how officials classified the driver. Issued in Portsmouth and valid until 1942, it shows how identity checks once relied on paper. In the 1920s, these Michelin men were performers in inflatable tire suits used for street promos, making the famous mascot look like a real walking stack of rubber. They were basically early viral marketing, stopping traffic long before billboards and social media could do the job. 1938. This odd beak guard let a chicken eat and drink while reducing sharp pecks that can injure other birds in crowded coops. It shows an early attempt to manage flock behavior with simple gear instead of bigger space or different breeding. Wilder, Idaho, November 1941. A migrant farm worker drives with the dashboard and mirror area packed with charms, keys, and tiny souvenirs. Those little objects were a portable home. To get a dramatic air-to-air photo, a photographer sat inside a clear capsule bolted under the wing of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, just inches from the slipstream. The P-38's twin-boom layout made strange add-ons possible. August 1968 in Czechoslovakia. A smiling local woman stands among Soviet soldiers at a temporary camp during the Warsaw Pact military entry. It captures the surreal mix of uniforms and everyday life as the Prague Spring was being ended. In the Soviet Siberian wilderness, a bride and groom walk across a muddy logging site, while a helicopter lands behind them like an unexpected guest. It shows how remote life worked there. When roads were missing, even a wedding could arrive by rotor and boots. Boston, 1938. After a powerful hurricane, residents spread soaked pants across an entire roof like a giant drying rack. It is a clever disaster hack from the pre-dryer era, using sun and wind to save clothes when homes were wet and power was unreliable. Cuba, 1941. Volunteers collect aluminum pots and scrap for the United States war effort, posing with a sign that says, "With the Americans and for the Americans to the end." It is a snapshot of total war logistics, when even kitchen metal was treated as a strategic resource. This early firefighter smoke mask looks like a blank metal face with round eye holes and a long nose tube meant to guide cleaner air for breathing. It is a reminder that before modern respirators, protection was crude, heavy. June 8, 1944. An armored vehicle rolls down the ramp of a landing ship onto the Normandy beachhead while troops guide it through the surf. These ships turn the ocean into a moving road. Before electric streetlights, a lamplighter walked the streets with a long pole to ignite and later shut off gas lamps one by one. This job vanished as cities wired up electricity. French professional wrestler Maurice Tillet, nicknamed the French Angel, became famous in the 1940s for his powerful build and calm personality outside the ring. Many people later compared his face to the character from the Shrek films. January 10, 1996, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a United States M1. Abrams armored vehicle from the 16th Engineer Battalion pushes through a road barricade near Dubrav. Engineer crews cleared routes for peacekeeping traffic. Britain, 1920. An old Mark IV tank had its weapons removed and was rebuilt into a tourist bus with benches inside and a wooden top deck for extra seats. It drove visitors along the Essex coast and to local fairs. Warsaw, 1945. Block after block lies flattened, with only a few torn buildings still standing like markers on a map. After the war, the city rebuilt its old town from paintings, photos, and measured drawings, almost like reconstructing history from a blueprint. Sydney, 1970. Model Simone Harris stood on a busy street in a swimsuit holding $20, offering it to the first man who asked why she was dressed that way. After 30 minutes, nobody asked, and the newspaper turned the silence into a headline about social behavior. 1953. A United States Navy aircraft on the carrier Monterey comes in offline and ends up hanging over the edge of the flight deck. Carrier landings give a pilot only seconds and meters to get it right. In 1945, a United States Army B-25 bomber got lost in fog and hit the Empire State Building, and crews later cut the wreckage apart inside the building to haul it out. 14 people died, yet the skyscraper survived and reopened quickly. New York City, early skyscraper era. A steelworker balances on a beam about 20 stories up while blindfolded, likely staged as a publicity photo to show confidence at height. These images sold the myth of fearless ironworkers, even though real crews relied on teamwork, signals. Germany, 1932. Election day workers carry a sick voter on a stretcher so he can cast a ballot at the polling place. It is a striking reminder that turnout was treated as a mission in a tense year when the country's politics were shifting fast. Paris, 1930s. A street performer lines up trained dogs holding little props while a crowd gathers by a tram stop. Before television and phones, tiny sidewalk shows like this were quick entertainment. 1943. Eastine Counter, once a waitress, works as a shipyard scaler, scraping and cleaning steel plates as a Liberty ship is built. This gritty prep work was essential so welds and paint would hold, and it shows how wartime industry trained new workers fast to meet shipbuilding quotas. Costa Rica, 1964. Irazu volcano sends a towering ash plume into the sky while cows graze in the calm foreground near Cartago. This eruption lasted for months and coated nearby towns with ash, turning bright daylight into a gray haze. 1943. American singer Kate Smith signs a bomb at a United States air base, a common morale ritual during the war. Stars used these visits to raise bonds and spirits, turning weapons into message boards for the home front. 1950s. An older patient sits in an early leg circulation machine that rhythmically squeezes and releases the limbs like a mechanical massage. Devices like this were the ancestors of today's pneumatic compression boots, used in hospitals to help keep blood moving during long periods of rest. 1934. A radiologist runs an X-ray machine while wearing heavy early protective gear, built when exposure risks were still being learned the hard way. That suit-like shield looks extreme, but it pushed clinics toward safer rooms, better shielding. In 1941, a Chinese tin worker in British Malaya hauls fresh ingots from a smelting plant in one of the world's top tin hubs. Tin from places like this quietly powered the modern age, turning into solder for radios. In February 1990 at Tokyo Dome in Tokyo, underdog Buster Douglas shocked the sports world by beating heavyweight champion Mike Tyson and flipping the betting odds on their head. Douglas had been ill and had lost his mother just weeks before. One day after the Berlin Wall opened in 1989, crowds climbed and celebrated at the Brandenburg Gate, turning a concrete border into a public stage. The wall had split the city since 1961, and within months, East Germany held its first free election. In 1964, at Lopnur in Xinjiang, People's Liberation Army cavalry moved in right after China's first nuclear test to secure the site. The test was codenamed 596, and it made China the fifth country to detonate a nuclear device. In 1981, an Egyptian man stands on the Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 before Christ and once the tallest structure on Earth for about 3,800 years. In January 1945 in southern France, newly arrived replacement soldiers studied, captured German weapons before joining frontline units. This training focused on recognizing sounds and shapes of enemy mortars and machine guns. From October 8 to October 10, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire burned about 3.3 square miles of Chicago and destroyed thousands of buildings. The rebuild pushed stricter fireproof building rules and helped Chicago become a world center for early steel frame skyscrapers. In 1936, in Cairo, Missouri, this school bus was a truck chassis rebuilt with a wooden body and simple bench seating. During the Great Depression, many rural United States school districts relied on low-cost converted trucks like this to carry students on long, unpaved routes. In 1907 in Normandy, Paul Cornu built this twin-rotor helicopter and briefly lifted off the ground, one of the first documented manned vertical takeoffs. The machine used a small engine driving two rotors, but it was hard to control. In 1942, at the Battle of Midway, the Japanese carrier Soryu turns hard while bomb splashes draw a huge ring around the ship. Midway ended with 4 Japanese fleet carriers lost, shifting the carrier war in the Pacific toward the United States. In 1946, German factory owner Oskar Schindler poses with some of the Jewish people he protected during World War II. By keeping about 1,200 names on his worker list and moving them to his plant in Brunlitz. In the 1980s, crews hauled bluefin tuna like this, a fish that many markets treated as low value until the 1970s. Rising sushi demand in Japan and new cold storage turned bluefin into one of the most expensive seafood products in the world. In 1942, Boeing's bomber plant was disguised with a fake neighborhood, using painted streets and rooftop sets to hide the factory from aerial scouts. This kind of camouflage helped keep high-volume aircraft production running while making the site look like ordinary housing from above. On November 10, 1962, a Soviet submarine surfaces near Cuba as the missile withdrawal begins under the United States and Soviet Union agreement that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. The deal removed Soviet missiles from Cuba and later United States Jupiter missiles from Turkey. In 1938, this cosmetic bracelet hid 7 tiny compartments, including a mirror plus slots for lipstick, face powder, blush, and applicator sponges. It was an early wearable beauty kit made for quick touch-ups without a handbag. In the 1940s, British munitions factory workers wrote, "A mess for Hess on an artillery shell," a jab at Rudolf Hess after his surprise flight to Britain in 1941. Workers often added messages like this before shipment. In the late 1940s, this is Pavlov's house in Stalingrad, the apartment block held by Soviet defenders for 58 days in 1942. Named after Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, it survived as a symbol of urban defense and still stands in Volgograd with a memorial. On the night of January 20, 1990 in Baku, a taxi lies crushed during the Soviet military crackdown known as Black January. The operation left over 100 civilians dead, and the shock accelerated Azerbaijan's push toward independence in 1991. In Chicago in 1950, salons used electric muscle stimulation belts that promised a slimmer figure by making muscles contract without exercise. Doctors later criticized these machines because they could not reliably reduce fat. In 1915, in the Russian Empire, a Garford truck from an Imperial Air Unit transports a Sikorsky S-12 aircraft, an early example of motorized airfield logistics. This kind of truck haul let crews move planes between fields faster than horse teams. On October 8, 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Israeli soldiers rest beside a Tyran 5, an Israeli-modified Soviet T-55 captured in earlier battles. Israel reused captured tanks by fitting Western radios and new parts. In the 1960s, a couple poses with their 16 children, a reminder of the baby boom era when large families were far more common in many countries. Before modern contraception became widespread in the mid-20th century. In the 1920s, travelers posed beside early motorhomes built by converting buses and trucks into house cars for long road trips. This boom followed the spread of paved highways and the rise of road tourism. On December 12, 1944, in Oulu, Finland, people formed a huge line for spirits after alcohol shops reopened following more than 3 months of wartime closure. Finland kept strict state control through the Alko monopoly. In 1944, in Munich, people ride an open-air replacement tram, a wooden platform built after normal streetcars were damaged and parts were scarce. German cities used these improvised cars to keep workers moving with minimal materials. In London in 1971, police detain a protester during an anti-war demonstration as opposition to the Vietnam War spread across Britain. These marches brought together students, trade union activists, and peace groups. In 1945, a United States soldier measures the barrel of the German railway artillery piece Dora, built with an 80-centimeter caliber. The Germans dismantled the system before capture, and Dora had previously fired at Sevastopol in 1942. On August 7, 1942, Soviet forced laborers stand after a shift at the Minister Achenbach mine in Brambauer near Lunen in Nazi Germany. Millions of civilians from the Soviet Union were deported for labor. In 1922, in Vasilievka, Samara Governorate, villagers thank an American Relief Administration worker after a food distribution during the Russian food crisis of 1921 to 1922. At the 1956 New York Auto Show, the time and space car concept turned heads with its clear bubble canopy and ultra-low, aircraft-like body. It came from the jet age trend where show cars tested ideas like wraparound visibility. At the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, the United States flag flew beside Japan's Hinamaru and Germany's swastika-era national flag during a ceremony. The host government used the event as a global showcase. On November 21, 1969, in Chelsea, London, television presenter Pete Brady demonstrates laminated safety glass made by Triplex Safety Glass Company during a live test. The layered glass uses plastic interlayers so it can crack but stay in one piece. In 1943, Soviet designer Fedor Petrov poses with the new D5S 85mm gun developed for the Su-85 self-propelled vehicle. This gun gave Soviet units a stronger way to counter German armored vehicles at longer ranges before the widespread arrival of the T-34-85. In 1938, during the Spanish Civil War, Barcelona was struck by repeated air raids by Franco-aligned forces, including Italian units based in the Mediterranean. The city became one of the first major European targets of modern urban air attack. In 1952, an 18-year-old French actress marries a young film director, photographed just before her worldwide fame. He later guided her breakout with the 1956 film And God Created Woman. In 1928 in Britain, customs officers inspect crates of gold shipped from Soviet Russia worth about £500,000. As the first 5-year plan began, the Soviet state exported gold to earn hard currency for buying industrial machines and technology abroad. In July 1943 in Greenville, South Carolina, United States Army medics run a protective decontamination drill on a volunteer inside a field tent. In 1986, at Serra Pelada in Pará, Brazil, tens of thousands of garimpeiros worked an open-pit gold rush that looked like a living staircase. Most ore was moved by hand in sacks up steep ladders, and at peak, the site drew around 100,000 workers. On April 18, 1945 in Leipzig, a United States soldier takes 2 German soldiers into custody near the city streetcars. Leipzig was secured that month just weeks before Germany signed surrender in early May 1945. In 1905 at Vicksburg, Mississippi, the river paddle steamer Mary H. Miller sits in a floating dry dock for repairs. Stern-wheel boats like this were built for shallow rivers, using a rear paddle and flat hull to move cargo through the Mississippi system. In the meantime, you're looking at these photos. Write in the comments which photo you like best and why. I will be glad to answer you. In 1934, at the Cincinnati Public Library, a worker treats books with naphthalene to protect them from moth and insect damage. Before modern climate control and sealed storage, during World War I in Sheffield, Britain, a harnessed elephant hauls heavy industrial loads through the streets when manpower and horses were stretched thin. Steel cities used animals like this for short-distance transport of bulky equipment between workshops. In 1942, 10-year-old Elizabeth Taylor did early studio screen tests that helped her sign with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Within 2 years, she starred in National Velvet in 1944. In 1957 at Cape Canaveral, the Vanguard TV-3 rocket failed just seconds after liftoff and broke apart on live television. The setback pushed the United States to launch Explorer 1 in January 1958. Hamburg photographed after 4 major air raids in July 1943, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The campaign, known as Operation Gomorrah, destroyed tens of thousands of homes and forced large-scale evacuations from the city. On August 12, 1953, in the Atlantic Ocean, a pilot ends up in the water near the United States Navy carrier Block Island after a failed takeoff, with his parachute acting like a float. Rescue helicopters were already being used as plane guard ships. In 1980, during the Iran-Iraq War, an Iraqi soldier lifts a heavy gear like a homemade dumbbell inside a trench. Trench lines in this war stretched for hundreds of miles, so soldiers often improvised exercise to stay ready during long stretches of waiting. In 1918, a United States 23rd Infantry gun crew uses a 37mm field gun to target barbed wire and machine gun posts in the First World War. In 1915 in Berlin, Richard Sorge lies in a hospital after being wounded while serving in the German Army during World War I. He later became a Soviet intelligence agent in Tokyo and warned that Germany would invade the Soviet Union in 1941. In Virginia, in 1862, a boy who escaped slavery sits with Union soldiers during the United States Civil War. The Union Army often sheltered escaped people as contrabands, and the Emancipation Proclamation soon made ending slavery a central war aim in 1863. In October 1914, German troops gathered inside the Cathedral of Our Lady in Antwerp after the city surrendered during the First World War. Antwerp's fall pushed the Belgian government into exile, and the cathedral is famous for major paintings by Peter Paul Rubens. On October 18, 1956, in Memphis, Elvis Presley stopped at a gas station, and a crowd quickly gathered for autographs, turning a routine stop into headline news. A heated dispute followed, police were called, and the station manager. On August 28, 1961, President John F. Kennedy walks at the White House with his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, the founding director of the Peace Corps. Shriver and Eunice Kennedy later launched the Special Olympics in 1968 for athletes with intellectual disabilities. In 1884, at Niagara Falls, abolitionist Frederick Douglass poses with his second wife, Helen Pitts, a white reformer and editor he married that year. Their interracial marriage sparked national controversy, yet they stayed together until Douglass's death in 1895. In the 1890s, a glass plate photograph captures an Irish girl racing a 3-wheeled bicycle with motion blur showing real speed on the street. Tricycles were popular for children and many women before the safety bicycle fully took over. In the 1880s, Tombstone, Arizona boomed as a silver mining town with stagecoaches and hitching lines filling Allen Street. The famous OK Corral gunfight happened in October 1881, and the town's silver output made it one of the richest camps in the Southwest. In May 1991, EPRDF forces entered Addis Ababa on armored vehicles, ending the Derg government after a 17-year civil conflict. Mengistu Haile Mariam fled days earlier, and a transitional government soon formed. In 1941, Russian émigré poets in Manchukuo held the first all-Manchukuo competition of Russian poets, tied to the large Russian-speaking community in Harbin. It shows how the diaspora kept Russian literature alive in northeast China long after 1917. In 1941, Austrian mountain infantry from the 137th Mountain Infantry Regiment march across open ground in the Soviet Union, photographed from a personal album. This was during the opening months of Operation Barbarossa. This November 5, 1867 studio portrait from Londonderry, New Hampshire, prints a bold claim. Flora Stewart was 117 years old. It was made as a small carte de visite card, and ages like this were often hard to verify before modern birth records. On June 6, 1944, 19-year-old Richard Christopher Brantones died on D-Day during the Allied landings in Normandy. He was the only son of Christopher and Juliana Brantones, and this portrait preserves the face behind one line in history. In December 1941 on Wake Island, wrecked F-4F-3, Wildcats of Marine Squadron VMF 211 sit on the airstrip after the Japanese capture. Wake's small garrison held out for about 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. On December 2, 1943 at Tarawa, United States Marines sprint low across the beach toward the airfield during the Battle of Baitio. The assault faced shallow reef water that slowed landing craft. In London in 1923, John Logie Baird recorded an early television transmission of a human face using a mechanical scanning system. The face looked striped because the picture was built line by a spinning disc. In Chicago during the Great Depression, Al Capone funded a soup kitchen that opened in November 1930 and served free meals to more than 2,000 people a day. Before Rocky, Sylvester Stallone sold his dog Butkus for $40 because he could not afford to keep him. After selling the Rocky script, he found the buyer, bought Butkus back for about $15,000, and put him in the movie. Around 1880 to 1890, an Irish family shelters in a rough stone and turf hut after being forced out of their home during the Land War over rents and land rights. This era gave the world the word boycott, named after land agent Charles Boycott in 1880. Marie Curie discovered polonium and radium in 1898 by processing tons of pitch blende and measuring tiny bursts of radiation. Her lab notes are still radioactive today, and she died in 1934 from aplastic anemia linked to long-term exposure. On Oak Island, Nova Scotia, the Money Pit was first reported in 1795 and has been excavated again and again, often flooding with seawater during digs. Teams have reported finds like coconut fiber and an inscribed stone, yet no verified treasure has been recovered. In 1994, the West Memphis Three were convicted in Arkansas in a case that became a symbol of the 1980s and 1990s moral panic around occult rumors and youth culture. In 1962, NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson computed key trajectory and timing numbers for Alan Shepard's Mercury flight and other early missions. In 1962, John Glenn later asked that Johnson personally verify the new electronic computer's orbital calculations before his flight. In 1932, thousands of World War I veterans and their families gathered in Washington, District of Columbia as the Bonus Army, demanding early payment of promised service bonuses during the Great Depression. This is Australian javelin thrower Reg Spears, photographed in competition before his most famous stunt in the 1960s. In 1964, he traveled from Britain to Australia by sealing himself inside a wooden crate, shipped as freight. In 1964, Australian athlete Reg Spears shipped himself from London to Australia inside a wooden crate, roughly 5 by 3 by 2.5 feet. He packed canned food, a flashlight, water, and bottles. At the end of the United States Civil War, the crew of the Union Navy steamer USS Hunchback posed in Virginia, showing black and white sailors serving in the same unit. The Union Navy employed thousands of black sailors. During World War II, women joined the workforce on London's Waterloo Bridge project, doing jobs like steelwork and welding as labor shortages grew. The new bridge was built from 1937 to 1942 and opened in 1942. In 1926, a Romani family poses at the doorway of a living wagon, with two girls seated and one holding a fox on her lap. The wagon served as both transport and home, a common setup for traveling Romani communities in parts of Europe during the early 20th century. In October 1962, near Cuba, Soviet submarine B-59 was pressured by United States naval practice charges, and Officer Vasily Arkhipov refused to approve firing a special armed torpedo, because approval required all three senior officers. On September 17, 1944, Major General James M. Gavin geared up beside a C-47 for the Operation Market Garden airborne jump into the Netherlands. Gavin jumped with his paratroopers. This woman is cleaning her shack in an Iowa Hooverville during the 1930s, a shantytown built by families hit hard by the Great Depression. The name Hooverville mocked President Herbert Hoover, who many Americans blamed for the economic collapse. Men stream out of a factory gate in Watertown, New York, many carrying metal lunch pails that became a symbol of shift work in the mid-20th century. In towns like this, the punch clock controlled daily life, and this gate was the fast trade zone for pay news, gossip. Two glider pilot regiment sergeants moved through a wrecked Dutch school during Operation Market Garden on September 20, 1944, checking the halls for hidden shooters. These men were trained to fly silent wooden gliders into landing zones and then fight on foot. This packed dining hall in Columbus, Ohio, shows how one timed meal could feed hundreds at the exact same minute, with benches squeezed close to keep order and move fast. In places like this, the kitchen worked like a factory with giant steam kettles and bread made in huge batches. In 1973, the newly finished World Trade Center rose like two steel cliffs, built with a strong tube frame that let the towers go higher while using less steel than many older skyscrapers. The site was a giant superblock with fast elevators and huge underground levels. This turn of the 20th century crew photo is often connected to the Jack Daniel Distillery, a place where skills were passed face to face long before modern machines took over. Nathan Nearest Green is widely credited as the mentor behind the early methods. On November 25, 1961, the Brandenburg Gate fades into thick fog while a lone guard stands on a watchtower beside a sign warning you are leaving West Berlin. Only a few months after the Berlin Wall was built in 1961, in 1984, people gathered outside the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach, California, holding signs like "The Bear Will Live Again and Forever" as the famous club faced removal. This beachside stage helped shape modern music by welcoming Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, Muddy Waters, and Jerry Garcia. Before home refrigerators, workers like these cut huge blocks of lake ice and hauled them to ice houses so families could keep food cold all summer. In the 19th century, the ice trade shipped frozen water by rail and boat. Backstage in 1925, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey clowns line up behind Madison Square Garden, while a poster shouts about the next show on April 26th. In the 1920s, this circus moved like a traveling city by train, bringing hundreds of performers. This Qajar-era studio portrait from Iran, taken in 1890, shows two women in full coverings posed with a calm, almost secretive confidence. Early photography was a status symbol in royal circles, and images like this preserve real fashion details and beauty trends. In 1932, Hoover Dam workers drilled into Black Canyon rock while standing 500 feet above the Colorado River, carving the first steps of a new landscape. The dam would reach 726 feet tall and used about 3,250,000 cubic yards of concrete. Two Brazilian passports stamped in Prague show photos and names under assumed identities. a rare clue tied in reports to the secretive overseas travel of a North Korean leader's family in the 1990s. One member of that family was later stopped in Japan in 2001 while trying to visit a Disney park. In 1910, 12-year-old Addie Laird stands beside a cotton mill machine in Vermont, surrounded by rows of fast-moving spools that could run all day. Photos like this helped push the United States towards stronger child labor laws. On April 25, 1945, American Army photographers crowded the riverbank to capture the Elbe meeting when United States and Soviet troops linked up near Torgau in Germany. That one handshake image became a symbol of the end of World War II in Europe. In May 1943 in South Africa, a KwaZulu leader in full ceremonial dress raises two fingers as officers look on during a public declaration of war on Germany. It is a striking reminder that World War II reached far beyond Europe. This is Mary Ann MacLeod, a young Scottish immigrant who arrived in New York in 1930 from the Isle of Lewis, one of the most remote parts of Scotland. She worked as a live-in maid, later married Fred Trump in 1936. In 1920, Marcus Garvey's Unia filled a Harlem hall with flags and uniforms, turning a meeting into a global call for black pride and economic power. At its peak, the Unia claimed millions of members and launched the Black Star Line. Virginia Hall, an American working with French and British intelligence during World War II, became one of the Allies' most effective undercover operatives in occupied France. With a prosthetic leg, she nicknamed Cuthbert. In the 1860s, Pauline Cushman went from stage actress to Union undercover messenger, gathering information behind Confederate lines until she was captured. A military court sentenced her to death, but Union troops arrived before the sentence was carried out. Around 1890, Pittsburgh's mills sent thick coal soot into the sky, powering the steel city that built rails, bridges, and skyscraper frames for a growing America. The haze could turn daytime into twilight, and families often scrubbed windows. In 1943, Soviet cameraman Alexander Elbert films from behind a BA-10 armored car, turning its steel body into a moving shield for the camera. The BA-10 was built before World War II, starting in 1938. This 1864 cabinet card shows William Hutchings at age 100, labeled as one of the last surviving veterans of the American Revolutionary War. Born before the United States existed, he lived long enough to be photographed in the Civil War era. London, 1957. Shoppers crowd the pavement outside Foyles on Charing Cross Road, a street once packed with famous bookshops. Founded in 1903, Foyles became one of London's biggest bookstores and was known for its maze-like rooms. In 1915, Benito Mussolini is seen being detained after a rally urging Italy to enter the First World War. His split with the Socialist Party over that issue sent him onto a new political path that would later reshape Italy's entire future. In 1944 in Colombia, Yukpa, model on, men pose with pan flutes and arrows, their face paint turning the portrait into a coded message of identity. The photo was made by Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov, a key figure in Colombian anthropology whose fieldwork helped document indigenous languages, music. In 1944, in northeast Greenland, United States Coast Guard men secured the German crew of the remote Edelweiss weather station, a tiny outpost built to feed vital Arctic forecasts into the North Atlantic. Weather data from Greenland could shape convoy routes. In 1967, Richard and Mildred Loving sit with their children on the steps of their Virginia home after the United States Supreme Court ended state bans on their marriage. The ruling struck down laws that blocked couples of different skin color from marrying. On May 4, 1970, Ohio National Guard troops in gas masks stood on Kent State University's campus as tension peaked during protests over the Vietnam War. Within days, a nationwide student strike spread to hundreds of campuses and involved millions. Around 1900 in Ireland, this street portrait captures fashionable friends posed beside a very short woman turning an everyday stroll into a scene you cannot stop studying. Glass negatives like this preserved tiny details, from hat trims to lace patterns. In 1901, wrestlers Maria Beer and Julie Frank lock into a twisting hold during a bout billed as the European Women's Wrestling Championship. At the time, women's wrestling tours drew huge crowds in theaters and fairgrounds. This plain building in Karlshorst, near Berlin, is where Germany's final surrender document was signed in 1945, ending the war in Europe. Behind these doors, the moment was recorded late on May 8th and into May 9th. On June 4, 1988, near the railway station in Arzamas, a freight train carrying hazardous cargo suffered a catastrophic accident that damaged nearby apartment buildings, photographed by amateur Nikolai Blashenkov. On January 9, 1986, in South Carolina, 25-year-old James Terry Roach pauses during an interview, staring at his fingertip as if weighing every word. He said he learned to read and write while imprisoned. In December 1986 at Chernobyl, the first photo of the elephant's foot captured a frozen flow of corium formed when the reactor core melted and mixed with sand, concrete, steel, and uranium fuel. Early crews could only get close for moments with heavy shielding. On September 8, 1944, Royal Air Force Beaufighter aircraft attacked the Italian ocean liner Rex as it was being moved toward Trieste to be sunk as a blockade, and the strike left the ship burning. The fire raged for 4 days before the liner rolled onto its side. And here is my favorite collection of historical photographs. If you have any favorite photos too, tell me about them in the comments, and I will be happy to answer you.